Yo, what is going on, guys? Dr. Ethan Turner here with the Fantasy Headliners, and it's time for the Week 2 Injury Update show every single week of the NFL season. I'm going to be hopping on here and just discussing some of the big injuries from around the NFL that are going to affect your fantasy team each and every week. I do this because I don't want you guys to be stressing out about injuries during the season. It's one of the hardest parts about fantasy football, so just let me do all the hard work for you. Let me tell you who I think is going to play, who's not going to play, who you should be playing, and who you should not be playing when it comes to injuries. Let's get into it. Week 2 Injury Update show. Let's go. So one thing that we want to make sure that we're doing here at the Fantasy Headliners is being accountable to you guys, and we're going to be tracking a lot of statistics this year, especially on what we're hitting and what we're missing on. So I'm doing that the same way that Kyle and Jake are for their start sit videos. I'm going to do that for my injury videos as well. If I say a guy's in and he ends up not playing, I want you guys to know that I screwed that up and I messed it up, and I'm going to try to self-evaluate and see why I made that mistake. Okay, so week 1 was a great week, 92% accurate. Only guy I missed was Chris Godwin. I'm going to talk about him a little bit later, but just know that we are tracking this, and I'm going to be updating you guys every single week on how I did the week before and how I'm doing for the whole season. Before we get started, I got something I got to get off my chest. Cam Akers is not in this video. Cam Akers was not hurt last week. Everybody's hitting me up in the comments. What was wrong with Cam Akers? I didn't know he was hurt. You didn't say anything about Cam Akers. He went on the injury report. He went on the injury report this week. Cam Akers is not hurt. He's in the doghouse. He lost his job, but he's not hurt. So don't hit me up in the comments asking about Cam Akers, because he's not going to be in this video. And if I'm being totally honest, I warned you guys that this could happen. I warned you guys back in February that I didn't think Cam Akers looked right during that whole playoff run. And I put it in the draft guide, which you should have bought. In my top 10 players that you shouldn't be drafting due to injury, I put Cam Akers on that list. And if you still drafted him after reading that list, I'm sorry, but that is not my problem. Okay? So if you have Cam Akers, don't worry. Like, the Headliners are here for you. We will help you dig yourself out of this hole. But just know that I told you not to jump in it. And I'm not going to be updating you about Cam Akers this week because there's nothing to update. The update is, dude's not a starter anymore. And until he can show that, he's not going to make it on this list. Because, honestly, I don't talk about guys that only get 3 carries. They're not fantasy relevant. And I'm not sorry about that. Now, let's get into some guys that you should actually care about for your fantasy team. All right, so up first, we didn't have any moment of silences this week, which is good. That means nobody is expected to miss the entire year, but we do have quite a few get out of here guys that have already been ruled out for this week. First up, we got Dak Prescott, probably the biggest injury news of the week. He's dealing with a thumb fracture. Typically, that's a scaphoid bone. It's just kind of right underneath the thumb, more of a wrist bone, but we call it a thumb bone because it does attach kind of to the thumb itself. He did have surgery to stabilize that fracture, so we're waiting for that bone to heal now. Lots of reports that indicate that they are expecting a pretty quick recovery for this. Jerry Jones kind of hates our fantasy teams, if I'm being honest. The normal recovery timeline for something like this is about 7 weeks to return to play for Dak. Jerry Jones is like, you know what? We can do it in less, okay? So we're not going to throw him on IR. We are not going to be allowed to stash him on IR. But if the recovery takes 4 weeks, like they're kind of expecting it to, there's a reason why they didn't put him on IR. Again, IR this year is 4 weeks instead of 6. So just know that if you have Dak in fantasy football, you're going to be waiting for Dak to play. It's probably going to be at least 3 weeks, but I'm guessing more in the 5 or 6 range. I do expect him to be back before their bye week in week 9. So you just kind of have to hold him in fantasy. Keenan Allen was supposed to play on Thursday night. He's dealing with a hamstring strain. I'm hoping the extra time off for him will help him get back for week 3, but it's hard to say with hamstring strains. We're just going to have to update you as we go with Keenan Allen. Harrison Butker has a sprained ankle. He sprained it kicking off, which it's pretty rare that I talk about kickers, but since he is one of the better ones in the league, just know that he is not expected to play this week, but he should be ready by week 3. So he got ruled out, should be ready by week 3. Ty Montgomery This one's not crazy fantasy relevant for the player, but I think it's fantasy relevant for what he affects, and that is Damian Harris, Ramondre Stevenson. Those three guys, Ty Montgomery and Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson, actually split the work almost even in the first week. So I'm hoping with Ty Montgomery going on IR with a knee injury that's going to open things up for Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson. They might become more fantasy relevant than they were when Ty Montgomery was healthy. Zach Wilson coming off his meniscus tear and bone bruise. He's still recovering. He is throwing footballs, so just giving you guys an update there. Not expected him back this week, but we're hoping maybe week 3 or week 4 for Zach Wilson. They're saying week 4 is kind of the target date, but we don't know for sure when Zach Wilson will be ready. And then we got Elijah Mitchell. He's dealing with an MCL tear. He was placed on IR. The expectation for this is that he's going to miss a pretty good chunk of time with this MCL tear. This is not a standard MCL tear. It's most likely a complete tear. There's probably more damage than just the MCL, but that's what they reported. If you can stash Elijah Mitchell in an IR spot, I do think you probably should. He will be back at some point this year, but if you can't stash him, we're looking at a probably 2-month injury minimum. I just have a hard time holding on to Elijah Mitchell. I just worry that this kind of derailed his entire season this year. So if you have Elijah Mitchell and you've got really short benches, or maybe you don't have IR spots, don't be afraid to drop him because he is not going to play for a while. Now let's look at just some guys that I think maybe could play, and we're going to start with the quarterbacks. Up first, we got Jameis Winston. He's dealing with a back injury. Went into the medical tent on Sunday with this back injury. But did come back out and played pretty well even after the injury. I do expect him to be ready and playing in week 2. Given he's still ramping up from his ACL tear, I think we could see Jameis Winston, continue to grow week to week as this season starts. Just don't forget that he's coming off that ACL tear. I saw some people maybe, chirping a little bit that he didn't look as good or as sharp as they hoped he would. He's coming back from a pretty major injury last season. He's going to have a little bit of a ramp up time, and I just think he's going to keep on improving a little bit each and every week. He's a guy that, I'm probably holding on to, if not maybe trusting him right away. I think that by the end of this year, if he remains healthy the whole year, Jameis Winston could be putting up some pretty big numbers in an offense that really clicked pretty well, given the fact that they haven't had a lot of practice time together. Another guy, quarterback, dealing with some back issues is Mac Jones. He was having back spasms. Didn't talk to the media after the Pats loss on Sunday, but he was seen racing Matt Patricia in practice. I don't think that was probably a fair race if you're asking me. But Mac Jones is dealing with back spasms. He appears to be fine, should play this week. Just know that back spasms can be pretty debilitating, so that's probably why they didn't let him talk to the media, that he was probably getting treatment. If anybody who's ever had a back spasm would tell you that it's pretty serious. You don't want to be messing with back spasms, even though it's typically an acute issue that goes away relatively quickly. Mac Jones was dealing with them. We'll see if he can, maintain his health going into week 2, but just know I do expect him to play in week 2. Next up, we got tight ends. The big one is George Kittle. This is a yearly occurrence. We might as well name the show after him, the injury show that is. He's dealing with a groin strain that he hadn't practiced last week, and we didn't really know much about it when I gave my update. And so I said, listen, we know George Kittle's history. He's not a guy that plays, crazy hurt. If he's hurt, there's a good chance he's going to miss. I was kind of warning people early in the week, hey, you need to be having some ideas on what you're going to do at tight end if you have George Kittle. He's not practicing yet this week, and so I do think I'm going to double down and say that I don't expect George Kittle to play this week either. You better have a replacement ready for your lineups if you're trusting George Kittle to be back. And then we got Zach Ertz, another guy that we talked about last week dealing with a calf strain. He did manage to play last week, but was basically a bust. He did score a touchdown, which kind of saved his week, but he didn't do a whole lot else besides that touchdown. I do expect Zach Ertz to play again, but just like last week, I think he's more of a touchdown-dependent tight end streamer than a surefire, locked-in, top 12 guy. I think that he really needs those touchdowns to be fantasy relevant if he's dealing with this calf strain week to week. Next up, we got wide receivers. We got Chris Godwin up first. I talked about him a little bit earlier when I was doing my recap from last week. He tore his ACL last December. He came back in week 1, was not expecting that. Great recovery timeline, just, pretty far ahead of what I would have expected from a wide receiver. But then he got hurt again. And so Chris Godwin was healthy, did look pretty good before he strained his hamstring. It's on the same side as the ACL. It's not ideal. They're calling it week to week already. I've seen this a million times with guys coming off of ACL tears. It's why I'm just not a big fan of drafting guys coming off ACL tears, because they do have this inherent risk for a compensatory type of injury, or really just any injury in the first year after an ACL tear. I'm expecting multiple weeks missed for Chris Godwin. He's most likely not playing. They haven't officially ruled him out, so I can't say get out of here yet as of this recording, but just know that I do not expect Chris Godwin to play this week, and probably not for the next couple weeks as he recovers from this hamstring strain. T. Higgins, he left the game with a concussion. He is progressing through the protocol. Sounds like he will most likely play. I do expect him to play if he can get more practice time in during the week. I think he's going to be okay. I do think you need to be checking in on the live stream on Saturday and Sunday morning for our member stream with Jake and Kyle, because they're going to give you updates on T. Higgins, where he is at practice-wise. But just know that right now it sounds like T. Higgins is on pace to return in week 2 and have cleared the concussion protocol by then. Another guy that we're monitoring for week 2 is Allen Lazard. He missed week 1 after he got his kind of foot/ankle stepped on in practice. He's back practicing in a limited capacity. I do think that Lazard is probably going to be the only receiver that Aaron Rodgers trusts and likes in this offense. So as soon as he's cleared to play, which is likely this week, he's in kind of an instant flex wide receiver 3 option for me. I just think that Lazard is going to be a target hog, because none of the receivers for Green Bay really impressed Aaron Rodgers in week 1. And so I think he trusts Allen Lazard. It's one of the few guys he does trust. So I'm okay with throwing him in, even if he's coming off this injury. Rondale Moore's dealing with a hamstring strain. Missed week 1. This was a late week injury, so I didn't really have a chance to update you guys on it last week. But Greg Dortch came in and actually filled in pretty nicely for Rondale Moore. Rondale Moore's still not practicing. It looks like he's trending toward missing another week in week 2. Again, Greg Dortch, 9 targets in a role that I kind of expected to be Rondale Moore's. So if you're in a really deep PPR league, or you're starting lots of wide receivers, maybe take a look at Greg Dortch if you haven't already. All right, up next we got Michael Pittman. He's been dealing with a quad injury, limited on Wednesday, and then downgraded on Thursday at practice. Pittman didn't appear to be injured in week 1. He played 98% of his team's offensive snaps, so I guess we can assume that he is dealing with something right now. We're just going to have to update you on the live show on his status on Saturday, because it sounds like this may be something that's getting worse as the week goes on. If I had to make a call at this moment, I would say that there's a good chance that Michael Pittman may miss this week. Up next, we got Michael Gallup dealing with an ACL tear from last season. He did miss week 1, but is practicing in a limited capacity with his team. He is even padding up, which is a good sign that he is getting close to coming back. I still think week 3 is a more realistic return timeline for Michael Gallup. I think it just makes more sense. But the way that Coach McCarthy is talking about that they are progressing Gallup at a pretty quick pace. So I guess there is a chance that he could play, but I'm still staying away from him from a fantasy perspective. And then finally, 2 wide receivers I'm just kind of keeping an eye on right now. I'm not hitting the panic button quite yet, but Mike Evans, Julio Jones, neither one of those guys has practiced as of Thursday. I think this is just veterans rest. I'm hoping it's just veterans rest. Both of them missed some time in Sunday's game with what we thought were maybe minor issues, but it sounds like we're just giving those guys some time to recoup during the week, not really exposing them to much practice. I'll be surprised if either of them miss, but again, something that we need to be taking care of and paying attention to as we head into the weekend to see if there are maybe some rumblings that one of these 2 guys isn't playing. Again, I expect them both to play. Moving on to the running backs. Up first, we got Najee Harris. He is dealing with a foot sprain. The problem with the foot sprain is that Najee has actually had a history of ankle and foot issues dating back to college. He has had 6 foot issues in his injury history thus far in his pretty short career. So that's a pretty concerning sign that we're having all these foot issues.
He was limited on Wednesday, full participant on Thursday, so it does seem like he's going to play. I'm expecting him to play, even though he did miss, he left the game and missed all of overtime on Sunday. It sounds like everything came back positive, so they are saying that he's going to play. He's saying that he's going to play. Am I buying that he is a great start this week? I don't really think so, because I don't think his foot is at 100%. He's playing behind a really bad offensive line, and he wasn't very efficient last year when he was perfectly healthy. So Najee Harris, it's going to be hard to sit a guy that you probably took in the first 20 picks, but don't be surprised if he disappoints you. He's more touchdown dependent this week than he is in a normal week. Up next, we got DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift's dealing with an ankle injury that was reported basically on Wednesday when the injury reports came out. Nothing about this on Sunday. Hasn't practiced Wednesday or Thursday. He looked really good in the game on Sunday. Great, in fact. And so he's already come out and said, hey, I expect to play this week. This is just rest. We're fixing something, minor. I would guess this is a minor ankle issue. The concern that I have is that DeAndre Swift does have a history of soft tissue injuries in his past. So anytime we see an injury designation with him, I am keeping an eye on it for you guys, just because we can't trust somebody that has missed 7 games in his first 2 seasons in the NFL due to soft tissue injuries. Alvin Kamara, another guy that's been banged up a little bit over the last few years. He's been dealing with a rib injury that he suffered in Sunday's game. He was limited in practice, didn't technically practice on Thursday, but was seen at practice, just wasn't doing what everybody else was doing. I'm still expecting him to play in week 2. Typically, rib injuries are more of a pain tolerance issue. It does give us a little bit of insight on maybe why Kamara was splitting so much work with Taysom Hill and Mark Ingram out of the backfield. I think Kamara is probably more of an RB2 this week for me, even kind of on the low end of the RB2 spectrum, because he is going to be dealing with this rib injury and he has a pretty tough matchup. J.K. Dobbins is coming back from his ACL tear. He did manage to get a full practice in on Wednesday, which is a good sign that he is ready to play in some capacity. I'm personally not starting J.K. Dobbins in any of the leagues that I have him, even though I said don't draft him. I do have him in a couple dynasty leagues, but in redraft, you shouldn't have drafted him, so this isn't really a problem for you. But if you did, just know that J.K. Dobbins is most likely going to be coming back in some capacity this week. Not a strong start. I don't know how much they're going to use him. I don't know how much they're going to work him in, but I am excited to see how he's moving, because in the preseason, he didn't look that good movement-wise. So we're hoping that J.K. Dobbins just stays healthy and gets a little bit of work, something that gives fantasy players a little bit of a, just a little taste. We just want a little bit to show that he is on pace to return to full capacity at some point in the first half of the season. Kenneth Walker, a rookie coming off of hernia surgery. He is practicing in full. Team expects him to play. Just know that dating back to last season, the Seahawks, as a team, have averaged less than 99 yards rushing with Geno Smith at quarterback as a team. So this is not a high-powered offense as long as Geno Smith is in there. I know he looked good in week 1, but just know that the team is not really great at running the football when he is in at quarterback. So I'm hoping that Kenneth Walker will maybe add some juice to that backfield. But I do think that Kenneth Walker, Rashad Penny are going to eat into each other's workload quite a bit. He's not a strong start for me. I'm probably not throwing him in, but just know that he does appear to be on track to play this week. Last up for the running backs, we got Leonard Fournette. He was dealing with a hamstring issue that limited him in practice on Wednesday, but he came back and practiced in full on Thursday. I think this is a case of veterans rest for Leonard Fournette. Until we see anything else that indicates that something actually is wrong with his hamstring, I'm just going to go with this. This is one of those cases where the team needed to put something on the injury report for why he wasn't practicing in full. I expect him to play well in week 2. I think that Leonard Fournette is a strong start at running back, and I wouldn't even be opposed to playing him in some DFS lineups this week. As for our defensive nugget, I always want to do this. This year, I'm really focused on trying to give you guys a little bit of a taste of something that I think could be impacting games in a major way. This week, Seahawks safety Jamal Adams done for the year after week 1 with a pretty significant quadriceps injury. They're pretty sure he had a full tear. If it's not full tear, it's at least enough of a tear that they need to do season-ending surgery on it. The Seahawks did not really plan. It looks like they did plan on using him more at the line of scrimmage. So without him rushing the quarterback, the team is not going to be as good against the run. We saw that. Then they just got absolutely abused by running backs in the pass game. So I think that Jamal Adams has being closer to the line of scrimmage was going to have an impact on that. Now he's gone. They get Jeff Wilson in week 2 coming up and replacing Elijah Mitchell. And so I think that Jeff Wilson could see a lot of work in the pass game. I hope that the 49ers are paying attention and use him in the pass game because he could be a really solid flex option for you this week. That's it. That's all I got.
So that's it, guys. All your injury updates for week 2. Leave me a comment down below if there's anybody that I missed. Make sure you check out our friends over at Manscaped, 20% off if you use the code HEADLINERS, and free shipping for all your manscaping product needs. That's all I got for you guys this week. The doc is out.